She is the legendary enchantress of Arthurian lore, feared, revered, and shrouded in mystery. Morgana Le Fay, the most powerful witch of Camelot, a sorceress of unmatched skill, a healer, a villain, and perhaps, a misunderstood hero. From her origins as King Arthur's half-sister to her rise as a master of dark magic, her story is one of betrayal, vengeance, and destiny. But who was Morgana truly? A wicked foe or a woman wronged? Join us as we unravel the legend of Morgana Le Fay, explained like never before. Plotting against Arthur. The legend of King Arthur has been told and retold in numerous versions throughout history, with varying portrayals of his allies and enemies. Among the most intriguing aspects of these stories is the theme of betrayal, particularly the conspiracies against Arthur. In some versions, key figures, including his own kin, actively work against him, seeking his downfall. These betrayals often involve Morgana Le Fay, Mordred, and external adversaries who join forces to overthrow the legendary king. Morgana Le Fay's role in the conspiracies. Morgana Le Fay, Arthur's half-sister, is one of the most enigmatic figures in Arthurian legend. Depending on the version of the tale, she is depicted as either a healer or a dark sorceress bent on destroying Arthur. In many medieval accounts, particularly in Sir Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur, Morgana Le Fay is actively involved in plots against Arthur. One of her earliest betrayals is her attempt to assassinate him. In some renditions, she enchants a magical cloak that is designed to burn its wearer to death, intending to gift it to Arthur. However, her plan is thwarted when the cloak is tested on another person, who perishes instead. This act solidifies her as a dangerous adversary to Arthur. Another version of her treachery involves forging alliances with Arthur's enemies. She conspires with figures such as Accolon, a knight with whom she has a romantic entanglement, in an attempt to dethrone Arthur. She provides Accolon with the legendary sword Excalibur, believing that with it, he can defeat Arthur in battle. However, the plan fails, and Arthur eventually recovers his sword and emerges victorious. Mordred, the ultimate betrayer. Perhaps the most famous act of betrayal against Arthur comes from his own son, or nephew, depending on the source, Mordred. Mordred's role in Arthurian legend is one of inevitable doom, as many versions depict him as the cause of Arthur's downfall. In some tellings, Morgana Le Fay is directly involved in Mordred's birth, orchestrating events to ensure his existence as a means of undoing Arthur's reign. Mordred's ultimate betrayal occurs when he seizes the throne of Camelot in Arthur's absence. As Arthur embarks on a campaign against the Roman Empire, Mordred takes advantage of his uncle's, or father's, absence and declares himself king. He also commits the grievous sin of attempting to marry Guinevere, Arthur's queen, thereby legitimizing his rule. In Le Morte d'Arthur, Arthur returns and engages in a climactic battle with Mordred at Camlan, where both men mortally wound each other, bringing Arthur's reign to a tragic end. Alliances with Arthur's enemies. Morgana Le Fay and Mordred are not the only figures who conspire against Arthur. In various tales, Arthur's enemies from foreign lands also seek his downfall, sometimes with the aid of his own kin. Saxon invaders, Roman forces, and rival knights frequently form alliances with Arthur's betrayers to bring about his destruction. In Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britanniae, Arthur is depicted as a formidable warrior king who expands his empire and defeats multiple adversaries. However, his conquests are ultimately undone by insidious internal betrayals. This theme is echoed in later adaptations, where Arthur's downfall is not just the result of external warfare but also the machinations of those he trusts. Thematic significance of betrayal. The recurring theme of betrayal in Arthurian legend serves multiple narrative purposes. Firstly, it reinforces the tragic nature of Arthur's story. He is often portrayed as a noble and just ruler, yet his demise is brought about by those closest to him. Secondly, these conspiracies highlight the fragility of power. Despite Arthur's legendary strength and wisdom, he is unable to prevent treachery within his own circle. Moreover, the conspiracies against Arthur often symbolize the decay of an idealistic realm. Camelot, envisioned as a utopian kingdom, ultimately falls due to human flaws such as ambition, jealousy, and deceit. This notion resonates across different adaptations of the legend, ensuring its enduring relevance. The plotting against Arthur is a central aspect of his legend, adding layers of complexity to his character and the world he inhabits. Whether through Morgana Le Fay's sorcery, Mordred's ambition, or the alliances of external enemies, these betrayals contribute to the epic tragedy of Arthur's fall. The legend continues to captivate audiences, reminding them of the dangers of betrayal and the inevitable consequences of internal strife. Though Arthur's kingdom is lost, his story endures, illustrating the timeless nature of heroism, loyalty, and treachery. Creating Mordred. The tale of King Arthur and his fabled kingdom of Camelot has been recounted through various medieval sources, each presenting a slightly different interpretation of the events that led to its fall. One of the most intriguing figures in these accounts is Mordred, a character whose origins and motivations are often subject to scrutiny. While some portray him as a tragic pawn of fate, others suggest a more deliberate orchestration behind his existence and actions. In some versions of the tale, the role of a scheming figure, sometimes identified as Morgana Le Fay, or another sorceress, is pivotal in bringing about Mordred's birth and his eventual betrayal of Arthur. This essay delves into the possibility that Mordred was a carefully crafted instrument of destruction, shaped through manipulation and dark intent. The significance of Mordred in Arthurian legend. Mordred is frequently depicted as Arthur's illegitimate son or nephew, depending on the source. In Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britanniae, circa 1136, Mordred is Arthur's nephew who usurps his uncle's throne in the king's absence. Later versions, such as Sir Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur, 1485, provide a more scandalous twist, making Mordred the product of an incestuous union between Arthur and his half-sister Morgana, or, in some retellings, Morgana Le Fay. This revelation alone suggests an underlying manipulation that predestines Mordred for a destructive role. If Mordred's birth was no accident but a calculated move by a powerful figure, it fundamentally changes the perception of his character. Instead of being merely an ambitious traitor, he becomes a tool forged by someone who seeks Arthur's ruin. Such a perspective places Morgana or Morgana Le Fay, both powerful enchantresses, at the center of an intricate web of deceit and vengeance. The role of Morgana and Morgana Le Fay. Both Morgana and Morgana Le Fay are commonly depicted as Arthur's half-sisters, daughters of Igraine from a previous marriage. Morgana is traditionally the wife of King Lot of Orkney and the mother of Gawain, Agravain, Gaheris, Gareth, and Mordred. Morgana Le Fay, on the other hand, is a sorceress often characterized by her antagonistic relationship with Arthur. Some versions of the legend merge aspects of these two figures, making them co-conspirators or even the same person under different names. Morgana, as depicted in Le Morte d'Arthur, unknowingly engages in an incestuous union with Arthur, resulting in Mordred's birth. However, alternative interpretations suggest that she may have deliberately seduced Arthur or used magic to disguise herself in order to conceive a child destined to be his downfall. If Morgana acted with such intent, it would indicate that she was motivated by a desire to weaken Arthur's legacy, possibly as retribution for the death of her husband Lot, who was killed in battle against Arthur's forces. Morgana Le Fay, while often portrayed as Arthur's foe, is not always linked to Mordred's birth. However, her long-standing animosity toward her brother and her mastery of magic make her a prime candidate for orchestrating events behind the scenes. If Morgana played a role in Mordred's conception or upbringing, it could imply that she saw him as the perfect instrument for dismantling Camelot. Mordred's upbringing and indoctrination. Regardless of whether Morgana or Morgana Le Fay engineered Mordred's birth, his upbringing significantly shaped his future. Mordred was raised away from Camelot, typically among the Orkney clan, which harbored resentment toward Arthur. If Mordred grew up under the influence of a vengeful mother or an embittered Morgana Le Fay, he would have been instilled with the belief that Arthur was an enemy rather than a father figure. Certain legends imply that Mordred's education included magical instruction, martial training, and exposure to courtly intrigue. If he was molded from an early age to challenge Arthur, then his eventual betrayal was not an act of sudden rebellion but the fulfillment of a long-planned scheme. This version of the story paints Mordred not as an opportunist but as a figure whose destiny was shaped by the ambitions and resentments of those who sought Camelot's fall. Manipulation and the fall of Camelot. As an adult, Mordred eventually finds his way into Arthur's court. Whether he arrives as a trusted knight or an enemy in disguise, he manages to work his way into a position of power. In some versions, he exposes Lancelot and Guinevere's affair, sowing discord among Arthur's knights. In others, he is given temporary rule over Camelot while Arthur is away, only to declare himself king in his uncle's absence. If Mordred was manipulated from the start, then the betrayal of Arthur was not merely a power grab but the culmination of a carefully orchestrated downfall. The timing of Mordred's rebellion, occurring when Arthur is occupied with his campaign against Lancelot, suggests strategic precision. It is possible that forces beyond Mordred were at work, ensuring that Arthur would be weakened and vulnerable when the final battle approached. The climactic battle and its implications. The Battle of Camlan marks the end of Arthur's reign and the fulfillment of Mordred's destructive purpose. The battle is typically depicted as a tragic culmination of misunderstandings, betrayals, and relentless fate. Arthur and Mordred face each other in combat, with Arthur mortally wounding his son or nephew but receiving a fatal blow in return. If Mordred was indeed a creation of manipulation, then his death signifies the completion of a long-laid plan. However, it also raises questions about his agency. Was he merely a pawn, or did he embrace his role willingly? Some portrayals depict Mordred as conflicted, a man caught between destiny and personal ambition. Others present him as wholly consumed by hatred, driven by the forces that molded him. The shadow behind the throne. The notion that Mordred was deliberately created to bring down Arthur and Camelot adds a new dimension to his character and the legend itself. Whether through Morgause's calculated seduction, Morgan Le Fay's mystical influence, or a combination of both, the idea that Mordred was destined for treachery before he was even born redefines him as more than just a villain. Instead, he becomes the embodiment of long-nurtured vengeance and inevitable fate. This perspective also challenges the traditional portrayal of Arthur as a victim of cruel fate. If his downfall was the result of deliberate machinations rather than tragic happenstance, then Camelot's fall becomes not just a cautionary tale about human frailty but a testament to the power of manipulation and destiny intertwined. In the end, Mordred stands as both a weapon and a warrior, his very existence shaped by those who sought to bring an end to Arthur's golden age. Trying to seduce or harm Arthur's knights. The Arthurian legends, rich with intrigue and mystical encounters, often depict powerful women who either seek to seduce or to harm the noble knights of the Round Table. Chief among these figures are Morgan Le Fay, the Lady of the Lake, and various enchantresses who use their supernatural abilities to test the valor and virtue of Arthur's champions. One of the most prominent knights targeted by these figures is Sir Lancelot, the greatest of Arthur's warriors and the most renowned for his chivalry. This essay explores the ways in which these women, particularly Morgan Le Fay, seek to ensnare, challenge, or destroy Arthur's knights through seduction, deception, and magical coercion. Morgan Le Fay, the archetypal enchantress. Morgan Le Fay, Arthur's half-sister and a powerful sorceress, is often portrayed as a primary antagonist in Arthurian legend. While her role fluctuates between being an outright villain and a morally ambiguous trickster, her relationship with Arthur's knights, especially Lancelot, is one of manipulation and challenge. Morgan Le Fay's motivations stem from multiple sources: her opposition to King Arthur, her rivalry with Guinevere, and her desire to control or undermine the chivalric order. She frequently employs magic to entrap knights, testing their loyalty and strength. One of the most famous examples occurs in Le Morte d'Arthur by Sir Thomas Malory, where she captures Lancelot and attempts to force him to become her lover. Lancelot, steadfast in his devotion to Guinevere and his knightly vows, refuses her advances, demonstrating his virtue and resistance to temptation. Frustrated by his defiance, Morgan often releases him but not without subjecting him to further trials. Beyond seduction, Morgan Le Fay actively seeks to harm Arthur's knights. She frequently uses enchantments, illusions, and even assassination attempts. In some versions of the legend, she crafts a magical cloak intended to kill Guinevere, only for it to be tested on an unsuspecting maiden who perishes instead. Her cunning and relentless pursuit of Arthur's downfall make her one of the most formidable figures in Arthurian mythology. The Lady of the Lake and other enchantresses. The Lady of the Lake, often identified as Nimue, occupies a more complex role in Arthurian legend. She is both a benefactor and a potential disruptor of the chivalric order. Though she gifts Excalibur to Arthur, she is also responsible for enchanting and imprisoning Merlin, thereby removing one of Arthur's most trusted advisors. Unlike Morgan Le Fay, who openly antagonizes the knights, Nimue and other enchantresses often test knights through seduction rather than outright harm. In some accounts, Nimue uses her beauty and magical knowledge to captivate Sir Pelias, manipulating his emotions to achieve her ends. Similarly, in Le Morte d'Arthur, multiple sorceresses attempt to lure knights into magical slumber or captivity, seeking their love or service. The Trials of Sir Lancelot. Lancelot, as the paragon of knighthood, frequently finds himself the target of both seductive and perilous trials. Morgana Le Fay is not the only woman who tries to ensnare him. Many other women, both mortal and supernatural, seek his affection. His unwavering commitment to Queen Guinevere, despite its moral complexities, serves as both his greatest strength and his ultimate downfall. One of the most significant tests Lancelot endures occurs when he is tricked into sleeping with Elaine of Corbenic. Unlike Morgana Le Fay's forceful attempts, Elaine's deception is orchestrated through magic, disguising herself as Guinevere to fulfill a prophecy that she would bear Lancelot's son, Galahad. Though Lancelot's actions in this instance are against his will, the event has profound consequences for his psyche and his relationships. It exposes his vulnerability to manipulation and, ultimately, contributes to the disintegration of his bond with Guinevere. Other knights and their encounters with enchantresses. While Lancelot is the most frequently targeted knight, others also endure trials at the hands of sorceresses. Sir Gawain, known for his courtesy and susceptibility to women, often finds himself in precarious situations where he must navigate the fine line between chivalry and self-preservation. In Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, Lady Bertilac attempts to seduce him as part of a test orchestrated by her husband. Gawain's struggle between resisting temptation and maintaining his honor exemplifies the constant challenges faced by Arthur's knights. Similarly, Sir Tristram and Sir Percival encounter enchantresses who seek to sway them from their quests. Percival, in particular, undergoes a test of purity when he is seduced by a demonic woman who represents earthly temptation. His ability to resist her advances signifies his spiritual fortitude, making him a key candidate for the Holy Grail quest. Symbolism and themes. The repeated theme of seduction and harm in Arthurian legend serves multiple purposes. On a narrative level, it provides compelling conflicts that test knights resolve. On a symbolic level, these encounters reflect broader themes of temptation, virtue, and the struggle between duty and desire. Women like Morgana Le Fay and Nimue embody the duality of the feminine, both nurturing and destructive, alluring yet dangerous. These figures also represent the tension between magic and chivalry. The knights, bound by codes of honor and martial prowess, often find themselves at odds with enchantresses who wield supernatural forces beyond their understanding. The clashes between these two worlds highlight the limits of knightly valor in the face of sorcery and deception. The Arthurian legends present a world where knights must constantly prove their virtue against forces that seek to corrupt or destroy them. Figures like Morgana Le Fay, Nimue, and other enchantresses challenge the ideals of chivalry through seduction and magical coercion. Lancelot, as the ultimate knight, endures the most trials, though other knights also face their own encounters with bewitching women. These stories reinforce the complexities of heroism, illustrating that true nobility is not merely found on the battlefield but also in the ability to resist temptation and uphold one's honor. The legends endure because they continue to explore timeless struggles between power and morality, love and duty, magic and might. Arthur's knights, though often victorious in combat, find their greatest battles within their own souls, making their trials at the hands of enchantresses some of the most enduring and thought-provoking aspects of the Arthurian tradition. Stealing Excalibur. The legend of King Arthur and his mystical sword, Excalibur, is one of the most well-known stories in mythology and literature. Excalibur represents Arthur's divine right to rule, his strength, and his unwavering connection to the mystical forces of Britain. While many aspects of Arthurian legend have evolved over the centuries, one of the most intriguing and less explored narratives is the idea that someone attempted to steal Excalibur from him. Some accounts suggest that a powerful figure, often portrayed as Morgana Le Fay or another sorceress, sought to take Excalibur to weaken Arthur. The theft of Excalibur is not just a tale of betrayal but also a reflection of power struggles, destiny, and the fragile nature of leadership. The importance of Excalibur. Excalibur is more than just a weapon, it is a symbol of Arthur's legitimacy as king. According to some versions of the legend, the sword was given to him by the Lady of the Lake, a mystical figure who bestowed upon him the weapon to aid him in his righteous rule. The sword is often imbued with magical properties, including an unbreakable blade and a scabbard that grants invulnerability. If Excalibur were to be stolen, it would not only be a physical loss but also a symbolic one, undermining Arthur's authority and making him vulnerable to his enemies. Morgana Le Fay, the enchantress and betrayer. One of the most prominent figures associated with an attempt to steal Excalibur is Morgana Le Fay. In many versions of the legend, Morgan is Arthur's half-sister, a powerful sorceress who harbors resentment towards him. Depending on the retelling, her motivations range from personal revenge to a broader ambition to overthrow Arthur's rule. Some tales depict her as a tragic figure whose grievances against Arthur stem from neglect or mistreatment, while others portray her as a cunning and malevolent schemer. According to some versions, Morgan orchestrates a plan to steal Excalibur by using deception. She either seduces Arthur or manipulates those close to him, such as his knights, to gain access to the sword. In some accounts, she gives the sword to her lover or an ally, hoping to use it against Arthur. However, her plan is often thwarted, and the sword is returned to its rightful owner. This act of attempted theft cements her role as a formidable antagonist in Arthurian lore. Other figures in the theft of Excalibur. While Morgana Le Fay is the most commonly associated character with the theft of Excalibur, other figures have been linked to similar attempts. Some versions of the legend suggest that another sorceress or enemy of Arthur, such as an evil queen or a rival knight, attempts to take the sword. In some retellings, it is a test of Arthur's worthiness, orchestrated by the Lady of the Lake or another mystical entity. Additionally, in some modern interpretations, Guinevere, Arthur's queen, is portrayed as being involved in the theft, either willingly or through coercion. Her complicated relationship with Arthur and her affair with Lancelot in many versions of the legend make her a figure of intrigue, sometimes acting against Arthur in a moment of weakness or desperation. The symbolism of the theft. The theft of Excalibur carries deep symbolic meaning. It represents the fragility of power and how quickly a ruler's strength can be compromised. Arthur's reign is often depicted as golden but doomed, and the loss or attempted loss of Excalibur foreshadows his eventual downfall. The legend also highlights themes of trust and betrayal. Those closest to Arthur, his family, his trusted knights, and his allies, are often the ones who turn against him. The attempted theft of Excalibur underscores the internal conflicts within Camelot, showing that Arthur's greatest enemies may not always be external forces but those within his own circle. Variations of the story. Different versions of the Arthurian legend interpret the theft of Excalibur in various ways. Some medieval texts hint at the idea that the sword is stolen, while others emphasize Arthur's unwavering grip on his weapon. In later adaptations, particularly in modern literature, film, and television, the idea of stealing Excalibur has been expanded upon. Writers and filmmakers have explored the concept of what would happen if Excalibur fell into the wrong hands, creating alternate histories and what-if scenarios that depict a world where Arthur is left vulnerable or must fight to reclaim his weapon. For example, in some fantasy novels, Excalibur is depicted as a sentient weapon that resists being wielded by those unworthy of its power. In these stories, the theft of Excalibur results in unintended consequences, such as the sword rejecting its new owner or creating chaos that forces Arthur to retrieve it. In other versions, the theft is part of a greater prophecy, one that signals the beginning of the end for Camelot and Arthur's reign. Lessons from the legend. The legend of stealing Excalibur offers valuable lessons about power, loyalty, and the dangers of ambition. It serves as a reminder that even the strongest leaders are vulnerable to deception and betrayal. Arthur's ability to recover from such betrayals, or in some cases, his failure to do so, reflects the challenges that come with leadership. The legend also emphasizes the idea that true power is not just about possessing a mighty weapon but about the character and wisdom of the one who wields it. Furthermore, the role of Morgana Le Fay and other figures who attempt to steal Excalibur highlights the complex nature of morality in Arthurian legend. Morgan is often seen as a villain, but some interpretations paint her as a misunderstood character seeking justice or reclaiming what she believes is rightfully hers. The theft of Excalibur can be seen as an act of rebellion against a flawed king rather than just an evil plot, adding depth to the story and encouraging audiences to question the nature of heroism and villainy. The tale of stealing Excalibur is a fascinating subplot in the larger narrative of King Arthur and his legendary sword. While not always the central focus of Arthurian literature, the idea that someone attempted to take the sword to weaken Arthur adds intrigue and depth to the mythos. Whether interpreted as an act of betrayal, ambition, or even justice, The theft of Excalibur serves as a powerful reminder of the complexities of leadership, the dangers of power struggles, and the inevitable downfall that awaits even the greatest of kings. This legend continues to captivate audiences, proving that the story of King Arthur and Excalibur remains as timeless as ever. The Mists of Avalon, Marion Zimmer Bradley, 1983. Marion Zimmer Bradley's The Mists of Avalon, 1983, is a reimagining of the Arthurian legend from a feminist perspective, focusing on the life of Morgane, also known as Morgana Le Fay. Unlike traditional tellings where Arthur, Merlin, and male knights dominate the narrative, Bradley shifts the perspective to the women behind the throne: Morgane, Igraine, Vivian, and Gwenevere. This novel explores themes of power, religion, gender roles, and the clash between old pagan traditions and the rising influence of Christianity in Britain. A shift in perspective: Morgane as the protagonist. Traditionally depicted as an evil sorceress, Morgane is instead presented as a complex, intelligent, and deeply spiritual woman whose motivations stem from devotion to her faith and her people rather than malice. Raised on Avalon under the guidance of the high priestess Vivian, Morgane is trained in the mystical ways of the goddess and the ancient traditions of the Druids. Her story is one of struggle between duty and personal desires as she navigates the changing political and spiritual landscape of Britain. Unlike in male-centric versions of the Arthurian cycle, Morgane here is not merely an antagonist or a temptress but a deeply nuanced character who seeks to protect Avalon and its traditions. She is caught between the fading pagan world and the growing influence of Christianity, which seeks to eradicate the old ways. Her love, loyalty, and betrayals are framed within this larger cultural and religious conflict. The Women of Avalon, female-centric storytelling. Bradley constructs a narrative where the women of the Arthurian world hold the real power, even when it is exercised behind the scenes. The novel focuses on four primary female characters. Morgane, the protagonist, torn between her role as a priestess and her personal struggles with love and destiny. Igraine, Morgane's mother, whose marriage to Uther Pendragon is orchestrated by Vivian for political and spiritual reasons. Vivian, the high priestess of Avalon, a formidable figure who seeks to ensure the continuation of the goddess's worship, often manipulating events to achieve her goals. Gwenevere, Arthur's wife, a devout Christian who represents the patriarchal and suppressive elements of the new religious order, often standing in direct contrast to Morgane. Each of these women is fully realized, with their desires, fears, and agency given as much importance as any male figure in the legend. The novel challenges the traditional roles assigned to women in medieval literature, showing how they influence the world in both overt and subtle ways. Themes of feminism and gender roles. One of the novel's most striking aspects is its exploration of gender roles and the power dynamics between men and women. The Mists of Avalon argues that history has been shaped to diminish the contributions of women, especially those in spiritual and political spheres. Through Morgane and Vivian, the novel presents a world where women once held great power but were gradually pushed aside by the spread of Christianity and its patriarchal structures. Bradley portrays Christianity as a force that seeks to control women and suppress their independence. Gwenevere, Arthur's queen, is deeply religious and often views sexuality and female autonomy as sinful. She actively promotes the displacement of Avalon's goddess worship in favor of Christian doctrine, representing the shift in societal power from matriarchal structures to patriarchal ones. The conflict between Morgane and Gwenevere symbolizes the larger struggle between these two worldviews. Additionally, the novel critiques the limited roles available to women, virgin, wife, or mother, by showing how these expectations constrain the female characters. Morgane defies these norms by choosing her own path, even when it isolates her. Her relationships with men, including her brother Arthur and Lancelot, are not romanticized but rather examined through a lens that acknowledges the limitations and sacrifices placed upon women in patriarchal societies. The conflict between paganism and Christianity. The novel is set against the backdrop of the waning influence of pagan traditions and the rise of Christianity in Britain. Avalon, the mystical isle where Morgane is trained, represents the old ways, reverence for nature, female divinity, and a balance between masculine and feminine energies. In contrast, Christianity is depicted as rigid, patriarchal, and intent on erasing pagan customs. Arthur himself is caught between these two worlds. Initially, he swears allegiance to both Avalon and Christianity, but over time, the influence of the church and Gwenevere leads him to abandon the old ways. This decision contributes to the downfall of Camelot, illustrating the novel's argument that the loss of feminine power and the suppression of the goddess ultimately lead to societal imbalance and destruction. Morgana's struggle is emblematic of this cultural transition. As a priestess of Avalon, she seeks to preserve the old traditions, but she faces increasing resistance as Christianity's dominance grows. Her frustration and despair at the erasure of her world are central to the novel's themes, making The Mists of Avalon a poignant commentary on the loss of female-centered spirituality. Character development and moral complexity. Unlike traditional Arthurian tales, which often depict characters in black and white moral terms, Bradley's novel embraces moral complexity. No character is purely good or evil. Instead, they are driven by personal motivations, conflicting loyalties, and the limitations imposed by their society. Morgana is not a villain but a woman who believes she is fighting for a just cause, even when her actions have unintended consequences. Vivian is both a wise leader and a manipulator, willing to sacrifice individuals for what she perceives as the greater good. Gwenevere is not merely a pious queen but a woman shaped by fear, societal expectations, and religious guilt. Arthur is a noble king yet flawed, torn between his love for Morgana, his duty to Gwenevere, and his political ambitions. This nuanced portrayal makes the characters feel realistic and allows the reader to empathize with multiple perspectives, even as they come into conflict with one another. Legacy and impact. The Mists of Avalon remains one of the most influential feminist reworkings of Arthurian legend. By centering the female characters and challenging the traditionally male-dominated narrative, Bradley created a story that resonated with readers seeking alternative interpretations of history and mythology. The novel's emphasis on spiritual and gender conflicts, as well as its critique of patriarchal structures, aligns it with second-wave feminism, which was prominent during the time of its publication. It has inspired numerous retellings and adaptations that seek to explore history and legend through a more inclusive lens. However, it is also important to acknowledge that Marion Zimmer Bradley's personal legacy has been tainted by allegations of child abuse, which have led some readers to re-evaluate their relationship with the novel. While the book remains a seminal work in feminist fantasy literature, these allegations have cast a shadow over its author's reputation. Merlin, BBC series, 2008–2012. The BBC television series Merlin, 2008–2012, reimagines Arthurian legend in a world where magic is outlawed, centering on the young wizard Merlin and his destiny to protect Prince Arthur. One of the most complex and compelling characters in the series is Morgana Pendragon, played by Katie McGrath. Initially portrayed as a noblewoman with a kind heart, Morgana undergoes a transformation into the show's primary antagonist. Her journey from Arthur's closest ally to his greatest adversary is marked by betrayal, pain, and a growing belief in her own destiny to overthrow him. Morgana's arc is one of the most significant in Merlin, highlighting themes of oppression, fate, and the corruption of power. Morgana's early characterization, a noble heart in conflict. At the beginning of Merlin, Morgana is the ward of King Uther Pendragon and a close companion to Arthur. She is strong-willed, compassionate, and openly opposes Uther's ruthless persecution of magic users. Morgana's kindness is evident in her interactions with others, especially her maid and confidant, Gwen. However, early signs of her internal conflict emerge as she begins experiencing prophetic dreams, hinting at latent magical abilities. Morgana's empathy extends to those who suffer under Uther's tyranny, particularly those accused of sorcery. She despises his harsh rule and often argues with him over his treatment of suspected magic users. This moral stance initially aligns her with Merlin, as both characters struggle under Uther's rigid rule. Despite her noble status, she shows a deep sense of justice and frequently expresses concern for the oppressed. The awakening of Morgana's powers and her alienation. Morgana's turning point begins when she realizes she has magic. As she experiences more powerful visions and unexplainable occurrences, she seeks guidance from others, including Gaius and Merlin. However, instead of receiving support, she finds herself increasingly isolated. Gaius, fearing Uther's wrath, withholds the truth about her abilities, and Merlin, despite sharing her magical nature, is forced to keep his own powers secret. This lack of support leads Morgana to feel betrayed and alone, fueling her resentment. Her fear grows when she learns of Uther's deep-seated hatred for magic. She realizes that if her secret were exposed, she would be executed like the sorcerers she has defended. This knowledge drives her toward Morgana, a powerful sorceress who offers her the acceptance and guidance she desperately craves. Morgana manipulates Morgana's fears and encourages her rebellion against Camelot, fostering her transformation into an enemy of Uther and, eventually, Arthur. Betrayal and transformation, Morgana's descent into darkness. Morgana's shift from conflicted noblewoman to antagonist is gradual yet inevitable. Her growing resentment toward Uther turns into full-fledged hatred when she learns he is her biological father. This revelation intensifies her desire for vengeance, convincing her that she is the rightful ruler of Camelot. Under Morgana's influence, Morgana begins plotting against Uther and aligns herself with dark magic. One of the pivotal moments in her descent occurs when she actively conspires to kill Uther. Initially, her attempts fail, but her persistence and increasing ruthlessness demonstrate how far she has fallen. When she returns after a year-long absence, she is more powerful, cunning, and determined to claim the throne. Her once compassionate nature is now overshadowed by a deep thirst for vengeance and control. Her relationship with Arthur deteriorates as she becomes more emboldened in her rebellion. Once his sister in all but blood, Morgana now sees him as an obstacle to her rightful claim. She no longer shows remorse for the lives lost in her quest for power. Instead, she surrounds herself with allies who share her goal, such as Mordred and Agravain, and launches relentless attacks against Camelot. Morgana's reign of terror and final downfall. Throughout the later seasons of Merlin, Morgana establishes herself as Camelot's greatest threat. She successfully overthrows Arthur at one point, seizing the throne and ruling through fear. However, her reign is short-lived, as Arthur and his allies reclaim Camelot. Despite multiple defeats, Morgana refuses to relent, constantly seeking new ways to destroy Arthur and restore magic to the land, though her methods become increasingly tyrannical. Morgana's paranoia and cruelty grow as she loses allies and fails in her conquests. Her obsession with defeating Arthur blinds her to reason, making her reckless and desperate. Her final attempt to kill him involves Mordred, whom she manipulates into betraying Arthur. However, her greatest moment of triumph is also her downfall. Arthur, though mortally wounded, manages to defeat Morgana in a final battle. Fatally injured, Morgana dies, her vision of ruling Camelot unfulfilled. Morgana's legacy in Merlin. Morgana's character arc is one of the most tragic and compelling in Merlin. Her descent from a noble-hearted ally to Arthur's greatest enemy is driven by betrayal, fear, and the pursuit of what she believes to be justice. While her actions make her the show's primary antagonist, her motivations are rooted in real pain and suffering. Morgana's story serves as a cautionary tale of how isolation and manipulation can turn even the most compassionate individuals into villains. In the end, her downfall is not just due to her opposition to Arthur but also to her own inability to see beyond vengeance. Morgana's legacy in Merlin is one of power, tragedy, and the consequences of unchecked ambition. Morgana Le Fay, witch, healer, villain, or misunderstood queen of magic. Her story has echoed through time, evolving with each retelling. But one truth remains: her power and legacy endure. What do you think? Was Morgana truly evil, or was she a victim of fate? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this dive into Arthurian legend, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a tale of myth and mystery. Until next time, stay curious, and beware the power of enchantment.